So now that we've talked about water and how important that is, I would say, well, number two, as far as the most important thing to consider about chemistry for life, would be carbon. So carbon, which is number 12 on the periodic table, right, is the backbone of pretty much every other structural molecule and pretty much all molecules that make up your body, your tissues, plant tissues, little snail in the picture here, right? All living, or sorry, all molecules, I guess, that are important to life are made of carbon as their backbone. So even though cells are mostly water, the rest consists of carbon-based compounds. Carbon is really versatile. It is unparalleled in its ability to form these really huge molecules that give life its flexibility, adaptability, structure, and function. So proteins, DNA, carbohydrates, other molecules that distinguish living matter are all based on these carbon backbones. So why is that? Okay, so organic compounds or organic chemistry is what you're referring to when you're talking about carbon-based compounds. So they can be really, really simple. CH4, right? That would be methane, all the way up to ginormous ones like DNA. Super, super huge. Millions of carbon molecules carbon atoms rather, all put together. So most organic compounds contain hydrogen atoms in addition to carbon atoms. Hydrogen is really, really common in the environment, and therefore it bonds to carbon really easily just because it's so all over the place, right? There are a couple of different explanations for this. So number one, vitalism. Okay, vital means, essential for life, right? Vitalism is the idea that organic compounds arise only in organisms. Okay, this was shown to be false when chemists synthesized many organic compounds in the laboratory with no living things involved. So in other words, this goes all the way back to our explanation of like where did life come from, right? Well, if living things need these organic molecules in order to live, then what came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Did life come first to make the organic compounds, or did the organic compounds come first where life eventually rose from those? Well, we've shown in the lab that it is possible to make organic compounds without life. So if you want to call that the egg, I guess the egg came first. However, we've never been able to synthesize a completely uh, you know, um, viable living thing in the lab. So jury's still out. You can use whatever you'd like to as far as that interpretation. Mechanism is the view that all natural phenomena are governed by physical and chemical laws, and that's pretty much what we're going to be, operating under as far as biology. So I think it's important to understand that, vitalism, for was pretty much disproven. So we know that organic compounds, can be made at least in the lab without life, right? Mechanism is the view that all natural phenomena are governed by physical and chemical laws. We have not yet broken this law, and we've seen it apply in every case. So I would say mechanism is the tried and true one. Vitalism was pretty much disproven a while ago. Okay, so carbon atoms can form diverse molecules by bonding to four other atoms at most, right? I don't know if you remember this from back 2 units ago when we talked about carbon. Carbon has four electrons in its outer shell. So that would be four valence electrons, right? That means it can either fill its shell with four more electrons in order to be happy, in order to be stable, or, at the ground state, um, or it can, basically get rid of four electrons in its outer shell to bring its shell down to zero, right? Either way, it's happy, right? So I think that that's an important point. We call this, since we're talking about valence electrons, the outermost electrons, we call this tetravalence. Okay, so tetra meaning four, valence, obviously what I just explained. This tetravalence can make large complex molecules possible, right? So a carbon can bond with four hydrogens, two hydrogens and one oxygen, two oxygens, other carbons. It can bond with lots and lots of things in multiple configurations. So in molecules with multiple carbons, each carbon bonded to four other atoms has a tetrahedral shape, which I'll show you in a second. Tetrahedral means kind of like a pyramid. However, when two carbon atoms are joined by a double bond, the molecule has a flat shape. So not pyramidal, right? It's relatively flat. And if you look here, what these are very, very simple organic molecules, right? The carbon is the black ball in the middle, so I'm just going to go to the ball and stick model to help you visualize it. Whereas the white balls are hydrogens, right? So you can have, again, 1 carbon, 4 hydrogens, 2 carbons, and 6 hydrogens. Or if you throw a double bond in between the carbons, it would be 2 carbons and 4 hydrogens, right? There are slight differences in the chemical names, right? So if you have all single bonds, you'd have A-N-E on the end. If you have a double bond, you'd have E-N-E on the end. If you've taken organic chemistry, you know this, but I kind of think this probably doesn't apply to most people in the class. The only reason I'm showing you this is because it just shows how diverse the bonds can be in carbon-based molecules, right? And therefore how diverse the shapes can be. Keep in mind, molecules always work by their shape. Okay, so you can see that this shape is a little bit different than this one, which is different than this one. They will have different biological functions in a living system. So, as I said before, carbon can bond with atoms of a whole bunch of different elements, right? So here you can see, I'm going to start on the right. Carbon has 1, 2, 3, 4 electrons in its outer shell. Nitrogen has 5 in its outer shell, which means it can accept 3. That's where that number 3 comes from. Oxygen has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which means that it can accept another 2. And hydrogen has a valence of 1. And keep in mind, we're talking about the first shell here, which can only accept 2 at most. So that's why its valence is 1. The valence means how much it can actually accept, right? So, carbon could bond with 4 of these or 2 oxygens. You just got to kind of like work out the electrons here. Again, I don't want this to turn into chemistry class, but I do want you to understand that carbon is the most versatile out of all the elements, at least in the first couple rows of the periodic table. And that's why we think, anyway, living things are based on carbon compounds. So just to give you another example, look at all the ridiculous diversity just from hydrogen and carbon that can be made, all these different shapes, right? Linear molecules like the ones at the top. You can have T-shaped molecules. You can have ones with double bonds that are in different places in between different carbons, right? So this would be a double bond in between the first 2 carbons. This would be a double bond in between the second and third, right? So when you take organic chemistry, you'll learn all about this. You can have them form ring structures, right? So this is like a hexagon. You can have them form hexagons with double bonds in them. There are lots and lots and lots of different ways to change the shape of these molecules. And keep in mind, the really important thing here, I think to keep in your head, is that each one of these molecules will have a different function because shape determines function in molecules, right? And in any molecule really. So that's, I think, a really important thing to consider. Now, hydrocarbons can form these really long tails. Okay, so you can see the black, and I guess that's kind of like a gray here, right? So each black shape, and I know they look like triangles here, is a carbon atom. Each round gray shape is a hydrogen. So it's carbon, hydrogen, carbon, hydrogen all the way down, right? Hydrocarbons only consist of carbon and hydrogen as compared to carbohydrates, which are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay, so again, we're splitting hairs with all these chemical names, but we'll work with these and they'll eventually sink in. So many organic molecules, such as fats, have hydrocarbon components. And because, look at all the bonds here that must be there, okay? Because there's so many bonds, these molecules can release a lot of energy. Okay, so what you're seeing here in this micrograph, these little red droplets, right, is basically a slide of fat cells. Okay, fat cells are loaded with fat, right? That's why they're called fat cells, of course. And when you look at them under the microscope, when you stain them with a stain that sticks to only fat, it highlights them in this red color. What that shows you is the fat, the lipids in there, which have hydrocarbon tails, are pretty much filling up those cells. So it is a really important molecule for life. We all have fat tissue, whether we want it or not, right? Isomers, on the other hand, are compounds with the same molecular formula, but different structures and properties. So if you look at A, see how many carbons are in it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the left, right? And that means there's 12 hydrogens. You can just trust me on that on the left side. Now, if you look at the right picture, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbons, and again, you have 12 hydrogens. Well, what's the difference? There is no difference in the chemical formula, But what there is a difference in the shape, which means even though the formula is going to be the same, they're going to function in different capacities, right? So they will have a different function in a living thing. Letter B, you still have the same formula, right? Two carbons double bonded together, two hydrogens, and we're going to call these X's, right? It doesn't really matter what they are. They're just a variable, right? There's no element that begins with X, right? Now, this would be called a cis molecule because the two X's are on the same side of the double bond, okay? Trans isomers, the two X's are on opposite sides of the double bond, right? So cis and trans. Obviously, this name was adapted or adopted to describe other things, as far as, social, definitions right now. So, that's where that was rooted in. You can also have isomers where you have handedness, right? So you can have a left isomer versus a D or derecha isomer, right? Which means, you might actually have mirror image of isomers, and these are called enantiomers. Each one of these different shaped compounds has the same chemical formula, but because the shape is different, we call them isomers, and they will act differently in the body. Okay, so how do they act differently in the body? Well, if you think about it, molecules, it's kind of like a key going into a lock, right? If the key is a different shape, or the reverse shape in this case, then it's not going to fit in the lock the same way or at all. So enantiomers are really important when we make pharmaceuticals. Think about it. You have to make a molecule that's going to be safe for people to take as well as be effective, right? So enantiomers have to be the right shape. If they are the same formula but the opposite shape, it might actually be ineffective or even worse, harmful to the person, right? So in this example, you have what's called L-DOPA. Okay, so this is the DOPA molecule, right? And it's left-handed. At least that's what how the researchers call it. This is effective in curing or treating rather Parkinson's disease. The D-DOPA, which is the opposite configuration, same formula, is not effective at all against Parkinson's disease. So what do you want to have in your medication to make sure that people are, benefiting from your drug? You want to have only the left-hand molecules in, not the right. You can see how complicated this can get, right? So those shapes, really what's going on here, those shapes, those functional groups, are the ones that are involved in chemical reactions. Again, if the formula changes or the molecule's in a different shape, those functional groups are not going to be the same thing. And I think it's probably best explained in this last slide here. Okay, a lioness versus a male lion, right? What's the difference? What leads to the lioness's body type? Smaller body, generally, no mane, right? That kind of thing. Well, estradiol, which we also call estrogen, okay, is the hormone that leads to her adult body form and appearance, right? So as we said before, smaller, no mane, obviously, it's female reproductive system instead of male. Most of that influence is because of estrogen, which is a very similar molecule to testosterone. Okay, so you can see that there are a couple of little differences. There's fewer double bonds over here in this ring. There's an oxygen, not a hydroxide on the end, right? But that's pretty much it. Everything else is completely the same. So what does testosterone do in a lion's body? It will result in a male lion phenotype being produced. Manes will grow. The lion will be a little bit larger. Testosterone is also the aggression hormone, so it'll cause that lion to want to be territorial and get rid of any other male lion in the vicinity, right? Could you actually switch these hormones and, come up with different adult lion types? Yeah, you can, right? So if you give testosterone to a female lion, she'll grow a mane, right? If you deny testosterone from a male lion or give that male lion estradiol or estrogen, we won't grow a mane, right? And therefore, and all the other effects go along with that too. This is what we're doing currently with people, okay? People that want to gender reassign, right? There are definitely ways to do that, and a big part of that is hormone therapy, right? So, this, which is considered the female hormone, estradiol, will result in female phenotypes. For humans, that would be all the stuff that happens after puberty, right? Male hormones are given to produce male phenotypes, same thing. Okay, so it's really important to understand that chemical shape leads to vast differences sometimes in function.